Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of the month where we look at a banner that doesn't include any spark or anything that will guarantee any sort of value to anyone who decides to gamble. But I'll still take a look at it anyways and provide you with my input or 2 cents. Enjoy the vid.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. I'm trying to transform from Akariss to Akariss. And no, I don't have a stamina potion on me right now, but in time, that'll happen. Anyways, more importantly, we have a special heroes banner here that basically introduces the summer to us. And there's definitely some things to consider and talk about here. But before we begin, as always, since this doesn't actually have a spark in it, it doesn't have any celestial stone or anything really that will guarantee you value for the orbs you spend in the game, I'm going to tell you that it is pretty much an automatic skip, because at that point you'd basically be gambling hundreds of orbs to try to get something here. But thankfully there isn't all that much that will entice you from having to spend orbs here. There are a couple things to consider, but generally speaking I'd say this is a pretty safe skip from what I've seen. But let me give you guys my full first impressions, and I will cover B-Dual Cavalry of course in a different video, which I'm sure has a lot of discussions to mention. But as I said, there's no guarantee you get it. But with that being said, let's actually take a look at what we have, what's been introduced to the game, and what it really means, well, for this particular summer banner, of course. So I will pause it during the video, and I will give you my input on every single one, plus of course my opinion on the art or whatnot. Let's see.
I'm so excited to hit the beach today that I hardly slept at all.
Okay, so Ashe is a Blue Lance Cav, and he is actually not in the game, so I guess he's with that alt seasonal curse. This is basically 3 houses seasonal banner. I'm not sure if you're feeling the 3 house fatigue, but looks like more of the same to me. He brings a very notable skill that no doubt will garner a lot of discussion, and of course that's B-Dual Cavalry 4. Forget Ashe himself, this is basically a death sentence to become fodder, because B-Dual Cavalry 4 will end up on so many Reinhardt's at this point that I don't even need to tell you, and I likely don't even need to produce a video to tell you why it should go to Reinhardt, but I will. It'll come maybe in a day or 2. Either way, he does have near trace as well, he does have joint hone speed, and he does have a preference weapon, but that doesn't really mean much because there's so many Blue Lance Cavs and so many better Blue Lance Cavs that even this preference weapon won't make him stand out enough for me to even continue this discussion. Really, it won't. He does have near trace in B-Dual Cav 4 and joint hone speed, and that is good enough to basically click on Allies tab in your game, inherit skill, and give it to a much better unit of any of these skills. This preference weapon isn't even worth talking about, so let's move on. Really, it's not.
I'm reeling you in.
Also, that feels like Deft Harpoon from like the first set of summer seasonals. We can see a stat spread right here. Pretty high attack, pretty high speed, pretty high defense, and dumps all his res. Doesn't matter. It's all been done and seen before.
I'm not usually one for exercise, but swimming sure is fun.
So, I'm a fan of Mercedes. Although I feel this is a bit indecent, but I'm a fan of Mercedes. Either way, Red Tome Cav, there's not that many actually. Most of them are basically seasonal or 5-star premium, but that's unfortunate because I guess she's not going to be the 4-star focus here. As you can see, I wish they would go as far Trace 3 and Res Push 4.
Tuckered out already?
The weapon is actually worth a mention. If we go back and take a look at it, even though it's impractical that we might see her, the weapon itself is essentially like a give yourself extra res, debuff enemy res, and if the enemy has any sort of res bonus, you also basically create even more of a gap there. Give yourself more res and enemy doesn't have res, which is an interesting weapon to consider because this will likely end up being in some form the inheritable weapon that we're going to get through the seasonal. Although it depends whether it's res or defense, depending on what the Tempest Trials unit ends up being, which we'll see at the end actually. I'm sure we'll see at the end. So Far Trace, she seems to dump speed and defense and gain a lot of attack and res. 5-star exclusive curse basically sentences her to unusability.
I caught a huge fish when I went diving. Probably.
Okay, so Caspar is again cursed in Seasonal Hell. He ends up being a Green Axe Infantry, which is whatever.
The biggest it's ever been caught. We should cook it up.
And he is no doubt our 4-star focus, which brings us a defense variant of that inheritable weapon. He is the 4-star focus, so that's bonus doubler and even attack wave if you were seeking that, although I don't feel like any of these skills are really worth summoning for, and the weapon itself is okay, but again I don't feel like it's worth, like I don't think it's worth or comparable to other axe inheritables as well if you consider other options like Springy Axe, Pledging Axe, Deck Swabber, even Slaying Axe and Huge Fan are pretty good too. So I don't really see all of those options being not as good as this. I don't think this is good, like a good option at all. I don't feel like this is worth orbs essentially. But this is the thing, I'm okay with seasonal banners basically being like my favorite characters in swimsuits, right? Like that's the point here. You don't need to be meta defining all the time. Speaking of which, it's our duo, which is Marianne and Hilda. So healer, flying healer. They had a lot of these lately. Definitely. Okay, so preference weapon, Nudge, which is a new heal, which is basically shove. As you can see here, pushes them away. That's cool. Especially when you consider what the actual staff does. So the staff will give a bonus attack to your allies within 2 spaces. That's good. And it seems like a breath effect, which is good, really good. Because before this, it's basically on Lancina and Enway Valoria. That breath effect is not locked to melee or physical weapons, so that actually makes her pretty good. Again, because there's no spark here, I wouldn't try to like spend all your orbs trying to get this, despite her being pretty unique in both the nudge shove effect, which will synergize pretty well with the weapon, and the weapon providing a breath effect to your allies, which is as always pretty good. She does come with even recovery, but I don't think there's much discussion needed here because honestly, with the way AR right now is, turn 1 maps are the norm and turn 1 is always an odd turn. So even recovery seems like a sort of skill that would be better off on some sort of like stall team or something that gives you value on both turns. Like you'd have both odd and even recovery working and you get a lot of healing on your team. That's the only way I can envision that being useful. Otherwise, it's not as good as odd recovery, and odd recovery is definitely the better skill to have. Although we expected even recovery to show up at some point, so here it is. As you'll see, get that nudge effect. Her stat spread is offense favored with low defense and res, with a little bit more res. It's pretty good for a support unit to be able to hold its own and actually can like fight in combat, I would say at least. And the dual skill is a 3-column, 3-row isolation, kind of like a pillar effect, with including the -7 attack debuff on enemies. Now, usually I would call this dual skill like really good and really impactful, but the problem is dual hindrance is essentially on 99% of defense teams nowadays, and if you run into a team that doesn't have it, it's probably a very easy team that wouldn't require this dual skill anyways. So it doesn't even matter what they print on dual skills nowadays, because generally speaking, they just don't matter. You just can't use them. Essentially, to use the dual skill, and I've seen maps with like multiple dual heroes, a very well guarded dual hindrance, and this just doesn't matter anymore. The only way I see dual skills like this, or any of them really mattering, is if you catapult gamble. And I mean, you literally have a max offense catapult, and try to gamble hitting the enemy dual hindrance. That's the only practical way I could see in trying to make these dual skills work. Imagine taking away a space on offense and trying to gamble away an enemy dual hindrance just to try to use a dual skill. Way too many layers of RNG for me to really consider even recommending slightly the viability of that. Also, it does have the clause that you can use it every third turn, and there is some interesting part of it that it does technically make your later turns easier. So what this means is, like, you could bring her in as support, not planning to use the dual skill, but let's say you've killed the dual units by turn 3 or turn 4, you can now officially use it to maybe shut down an enemy dance that you haven't killed yet. So that's pretty cool. Like, that application definitely exists, but it's not something that you would consider like on turn 1, which is far more impactful. Alright, so as you guys can no doubt see, we have a brand new bow cav probably given to us for the Tempest Trials. That is really good, really good, because it's been a while. It's been like Wrath Python been a while, or Rolf, and she's colorless, so I could expect her to be pretty good. Leonie herself, I feel, has always had a pretty decent attack speed spread from 3 houses, so she probably will end up being pretty solid of an addition to most cav teams in one form or another. Another thing to note here is that her weapon likely does the defense variant, similar to what Caspar's weapon did, I think. Could be wrong though. And that could be pretty good to swing or it could be attack as well. Buffing attack, maybe lowering enemy attack, could do that as well. And if it does something like that, that could be very comparable to something like Spendthrift Bow. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Definitely will cover it. And Leonie herself. But that's definitely a solid freebie, I would say. Because I think we don't get enough calves nowadays that are ranged. Forget those axe calves though. So yeah, pretty solid additions to the roster. The fodder itself is whatever, because even recovery isn't that impactful if you ask me. And honestly, without a spark system to guarantee any of these units, I wouldn't really recommend summoning. But yeah, if you do end up with any of these, they could definitely make an impact. I'd say that's it from me, folks. Thank you for watching. Look forward to future videos in the next few days where I'm going to cover both Leonie and probably B-Dual Cavalry 4, because that's definitely what we're talking about. Love you all. Go check me out on Twitch. Maybe consider supporting the channel if you want to keep seeing the content coming. Patreon is in the description below. Love you all. See you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.